They're called the lost generation, the baby busters.
The 13th generation in American history.
20-somethings, boomerangers.
Generation X.
Generation X.
Generation X.
How do you know if you're part of Generation X? Boomers, millennials, and Gen Z get all of the attention in the societal conversation. But what about the millions of Americans who were born after the post-World War II baby boom, but who can also still vividly remember life without the internet? Are they 70s kids? 80s kids? Both? Who decides these things? Does it really even matter? The definition of Generation X has changed a lot over the last 30 plus years, and trying to figure out the definitive answer to this question sent me down a rabbit hole of generational theory and lots of news clips from the 1990s. But when you have a channel named My So-Called Gen X Life, it's really important that this gets figured out. So, what and who is Generation X? Where did these people come from and where did they go? Well, that's what this video is all about.
And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? Letting the days go by.
Generation X. The millions of young Americans who are the 20-somethings. Younger than baby boomers and yuppies, not quite 30-something. Trying to define them as they define themselves has become a preoccupation because they clearly are a major force in American society and in the workplace.
We're all pretty bizarre. Some of us are just better at hiding it, that's all.
He likes it! Hey, Mikey! What is all about, Willis? Come on, guys. This is our time.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Want me to get a job on the line for the next 20 years? Until I'm granted leave with my gold-plated watch and my balls full of tumors because I surrendered the one thing that means shit to me? Well, honey, you can just exhale because it's not going to happen, not in this lifetime.
You know me, I've been keeping up with my JFK assassination theories, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm right on top of that, Rose.
I'm not even supposed to be here today.
Grown up! You're grown up!
We don't have a lot of time on this earth. We weren't meant to spend it this way. Human beings were not meant to sit in little cubicles staring at computer screens all day, filling out useless forms and listening to 8 different bosses drone on about mission statements.
I see all this potential, and I see it squandered. Entire generation pumping gas, waiting tables, slaves with white collars. Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need. We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no Great War, no Great Depression. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives. We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars, but we won't. We're slowly learning that fact. And we're very, very pissed off.
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It used to be that when school got out for the day, the kids went home to mom. But for more and more youngsters, that's not the way it is anymore. Many go home to an empty house. They come from families where both parents work or live with a single parent who works. An estimated 14 million children, ages 6 to 13 nationwide, now have working mothers. And once these kids leave the classroom each day, well, they're on their own. They're called Latchkey kids. Most have their own key to the house so they can let themselves in after school. This is their free time, their idle time. Many of them have almost no adult supervision of any kind. But when daycare and babysitters get too expensive, it becomes the only option for working parents. But the growing number of latchkey kids has become a cause for concern among parents, educators, and law enforcement people. Older adolescents fend for themselves outside the home. These are the ones especially susceptible to peer pressure, the age when friends can have more influence than parents.
My mom used to help my dad a lot at work, and when she wasn't home, I'd get into a lot of trouble.
And Mandy says she's seen other teens get into all kinds of trouble when their parents are at work.
Getting high, drunk, breaking into houses, just stealing things.
In fact, statistics show that in Fulton County last year, 61% of the crimes committed by juveniles involved kids with no supervision.
I think parents do not realize what the problems are going to be, and all of a sudden the problems are out of control and they don't know what to do about them.
And then there is the other fear, the fear that some harm could come to the children when mom and dad aren't there.
This is one of the few sounds 10-year-old Robbie hears when he comes home from school each day. He's one of an estimated 6 million latchkey kids in this country. Even though Robbie's mother worries about him, she thinks he does a pretty good job. But just to make sure, she often calls. Hello? Like many latchkey kids, Robbie says he follows the same routine most days. He usually does his homework first, then it's on to more leisurely activities.
They know their duties. You know, beds made, personal cleanliness, they're responsible for their homework, getting it to school, and, you know, they really rise to the occasion. I know it's not always easy on them because they don't have someone cushioning them, but as the months have progressed, I've seen a real definite change, that they're capable.
Do you ever feel guilty?
Every day.
While there is a downside to being a latchkey kid, we also found there's often an upside, and kids seem to be learning from these experiences on their own.
I think they're much more mature than some of their friends are. They know I'm trying my hardest. They appreciate me. I think they're kind of proud that they can do this.
For the most part, the experts agree that latchkey kids are doing okay.
With more single-parent families and families with both mom and dad working, the time between school's out for kids and work's over for parents is usually 2 or 3 hours. Some parents don't want or can't afford to put their child in an after-school daycare center. So these latchkey children wait home alone for mom and dad. Teach your children how to use the phone. Tell your kids how to dial 911 and other emergency phone numbers.
May I have the police, please?
About using the telephone, Andy also knows not to tell anyone who calls that he's home alone.
She's busy right now. May I take a message?
Also encourage your children to tell you about anything that makes them feel uncomfortable while they're home alone. By remembering these safety tips, your kids may feel a little less scared, yet be a little more careful.
It wasn't until the late 1980s that the term Generation X made its debut in American culture. Author Douglas Copeland, born in 1961, wrote the novel Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture, about a group of friends living together in Southern California around the year 1990. By 1991, the media was starting to notice this group of 20-somethings who were definitely not baby boomers, had been raised by television, and were too young to remember the JFK assassination, the moon landing, and maybe even Watergate. And as they struggled to find a name for these slackers, Copeland's Generation X began to stick.
They're called the Lost Generation, the Baby Busters, those who were born between 1961 and 1971. By many accounts, this post-baby boom generation is struggling. They apparently feel the older baby boomers have taken all the good jobs and all the good real estate. They have trouble leaving home, finding careers, and committing to relationships. They are angst-ridden, a bit bitter, and their chief talent seems to be the ironic aside. Writer Douglas Copeland describes their dilemma in his first novel called Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture. Douglas?
The Generation X, or the X generation, it is, I suppose you call it a splinter generation from the baby boom at large, which demographers say begins about 1945 and goes to 1965. That's more than 100 million people, and it's almost too much to expect everyone born in 20 years to share similar ways of thinking and seeing the world. And I've noticed through my own experience in talking to people, and I talked to a lot of people for research, that about 1957 or 1958, there's a real schism in the way the world is perceived. The earlier generation, I call them the Jane Fonda or Steven Spielberg generation of baby boomers.
The gee whiz, we can affect everything generation.
Certainly, yeah. They, in Joni and Woodstock and Peace and Acid, they see the world in the first person plural. It's a we generation, and we see it this way. And after about 57, 58, up to about 1970, after which you have a group I call the Benetton Youth, or the Young Republicans in Love, you have the X generation, which sometimes is called 20-something. I think that's a misnomer, because in a few years we're going to be mid-30-something, late 20-something. They're very much the individual generation. I refuse to say that we see the world this way, or us. That's not fair. I speak for myself and not for someone, Susan, who lives in Iowa City, Iowa, or Dave in Sacramento. It's very much, it's almost like the ultimate extension of what happens when you give people unlimited access to individualism.
I want you to set me straight. If whining is unfair, it's where's my piece of the pie? Where is this? Where is that?
I think what we're seeing is calling whining is maybe actually a birth cry or a birth pain. 2 years ago when I was selling the book, there was not even, 20-something was not even a word back then. And I encountered an extraordinary amount of opposition, even to the fact that this generation might exist. And I was very lucky in finding St. Martin's to publish the book.
Did your generation grow up without any barriers, boundaries, without any parameters? Were there not enough rules so that at least you had rules to break?
Unfortunately, there were no real rules to break. The rules had all been broken by then. So it was an arbitrary culture, or no grounding. And it was a culture of divorce, Pacer automobiles, Jimmy Carter. Just there is this awareness, there's this new awareness of this being a group, a separate entity. And it's like just waking up and, oh boy, this is our situation. And humans,
which is healthy.
Which is healthy. And humans being humans, of course, the tendency is to, complain a bit.
If you are not the make love, not war generation,
No.
and if you are not the drug generation,
No.
what is the defining characteristic of your generation?
I think irony, a tendency to make media-based jokes, Scooby-Doo jokes. When Scooby-Doo goes, hello? Like that. And we will find that perhaps amusing. And also, if I ask you a question and you give me a wrong answer, I'll go, like you just lost on Family Feud. And that's the way we format our world, because when our brains are being molded, we watch TV, and that's how we formatted it. Real inability to commit to relationships. I mean, I know people who've been going out for 10 years now and have just announced their engagement, and even then they won't be getting married for another 3-4 years.
Why does that happen? What are they afraid of?
Divorce. Clothing from the Gap and Banana Republic, which is generic, label-free, like clothing you might see illustrated in the dictionary. I noticed record collections. Most people who are X generation are fanatic about alphanumerically encoding their record collection by style, genre, artist. And if you want to drive them nuts, you simply misfile one of their Clash albums and they'll go berserk. It's stability, order. There is the definite perception that unless this generation takes care of the world, then it's going to be lost, because the generation that comes after us, and that's just a generational conceit, doesn't seem too concerned about history or the past, and nor does the generation before.
I feel, Douglas, you just told me you wouldn't have to take a mech job because of this book.
A McJob, that's right.
What is a McJob?
Well, I define a McJob in the book as let me get it correct, a low prestige, low dignity, low pay, no future job in the service sector, which is frequently considered a just wonderful career opportunity by people who have maybe never had to have one. The X presence is very strongly being felt in the workplace right now.
I hear a little bitterness in all of this, because these are the college graduates who feel that the future is not only problematic, it's just downright difficult.
Well, it's a numbers game. There simply are more people ahead of them. It means downsizing your expectations of 2 cars in a garage to maybe 1 car on-street parking.
If those are your expectations, if those things are important to you, then it's very difficult if you're in your 20s to all of a sudden be downsizing your expectations. But you write this book and you talk about the haves, you're not really talking about the have-nots. There are a lot of have-nots in the Generation X.
It's composed maybe 90% of have-nots, and maybe 40% of never-will-haves. And this is relevant only in the context that they were raised with the expectation of being a have for the rest of their life.
Not long after Copeland's novel was published, authors William Strauss and Neil Howe developed their Strauss-Howe generational theory, and they named Generation X 13ers, or the 13th generation. They go into major detail about this post-baby boom generation in their books Generations and 13th Gen, Abort, Ignore, Retry, Fail. If you find this kind of thing interesting, I cannot recommend their books enough, especially their 1997 book, The Fourth Turning, which predicts the future in ways that will blow your mind. And it's all based on their generational theory that describes a recurring generation cycle in both American and Western history. According to their theory, historical events are associated with recurring generational personas or archetypes, and each generational persona unleashes a new era they call a turning that lasts about 20 years, and in each turning, a new social, political, and economic climate exists. I'm actually going to do a video about this in the future. So here's Strauss and Howe talking about the 13th generation back in 1991.
The most important thing to look for in defining a generation is how the members of that generation define themselves. The 13th generation in American history, dating back to Benjamin Franklin, these are the 13th to know the American nation and flag. They also are faced with a real hard luck life cycle reminiscent of what the old lost generation knew. And the number 13 is a good reflection of that. It's also a slippery label, something that the kids themselves like because they're tired of being criticized by elders, being told that they're part of a bust, a baby bust group that is disappointing when compared with the boom.
One thing we talk about with the 13th generation is how attitudes toward children changed very dramatically in the early 1960s and through the 1970s. The 13th generation are the first babies people took pills not to have. And as the 1960s went on, we saw a new kind of movie come into national popularity, the Rosemary's Baby, the Exorcist type film, which depicted the child as devil, as bad, mean, and selfish. Many of the 13ers today in their late 20s remember that period, and their sense of identity, their sense of self, has in some ways been permanently shaped by that. Today, by contrast, since the early 1980s, we've had a whole new batch of cuddly baby movies. Today, with the emergence of yet a new generation, babies are to be protected. We see baby on board bumper stickers everywhere, and people think that children must be given a better national mission and must be given structure as children.
Okay. And we call them the millennial generation.
The ones that were born in between 1982 and the year 2003.
Right. Kids who are presently in third grade and younger.
It's when we saw a sudden change in people's attitudes toward divorce, toward family, towards structure and discipline in schools, a rethinking of many of the assumptions and the educational experiments that went wrong, that many people in retrospect believe went wrong during the 1970s.
I don't know. It's hard to put a label on my generation because I think that we're all pretty diverse.
I would call it the hip-hop generation.
I think the realist generation.
Call them the numb heads.
A bunch of burnouts.
Most of them are just kind of sit back and relax type generation, I guess. Watch the world go by.
We are becoming the couch potato generation.
Our generation really doesn't have a name. It doesn't have we have no direction.
Is that it, the nowhere generation? I feel like I'm somewhere. I don't feel like I'm nowhere.
You've heard all the media handles for the new crop of young Americans now in their early 20s, and you've read all the stories attempting to explain them. There are now more than 22 million of these people between the ages of 21 and 25. We've traveled across the country talking to many of them, and over the course of the next hour, you'll hear them explain themselves. These people are the vanguard of a new generation, and as you'll see, they are very different from the baby boomers who preceded them. These young Americans grew up with a feel-good president, a Wall Street boom, and an economy that's bottomed out just as they're ready to become a part of it. They're also the children of a communications explosion that's had a profound effect on how they process information about the world around them.
I
I think MTV and a lot of the other courses like that are teaching us to think shorter and shorter and shorter term, and to take information really quickly, not really think it out a whole lot, but to take it in.
It's the negative way of saying that our generation has a shorter attention span as opposed to its sophisticated watching of television. What we also have is a healthy sense of cynicism and skepticism.
I'm not gonna try it.
The ability to read lying speech, which is what most of television is. It's propaganda of one kind or another.
You can trust me. Nevertheless, in many ways, the members of this new generation are united by television, too. By the time they turn 21, these people had logged nearly 23,000 hours in front of the tube, their earliest window on the world.
What I remember is Watergate. I remember watching hours and hours of that on TV. That's one time when the TV was brought down from the attic and we were allowed to watch.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
The shooting of President Reagan, that would be the one thing that would pop to my head first.
I know it's true. Challenger, go and throttle up. Cause I saw it on TV.
The Challenger explosion, this was something that everybody my age witnessed before their very eyes. It was almost a visible symbol of the state of our nation kind of going up and exploding in flames. This is the kind of future that we look at sometimes.
I was a TV-aholic. I watched everything from Good Times,
Dang, oh man!
Jefferson's to Gilligan's Island.
Skipper, oh Skipper, oh Skipper!
I watch them today. They're hilarious.
I love humor because we had enough controversy day to day.
Come on, get happy!
Family.
Happy Days. Thank you very much.
Sanford and Son.
Starsky and Hutch.
Charlie's Angels.
Morning, Angels. I am a TV
David Carradine, Kung Fu. It's like a daily lesson, a daily teaching, you know.
When I was a kid, I liked watching $6 Million Man. That guy would just like, all of a sudden, just be turboing, and I was like stoked on that.
I remember a show called Julia, the nurse show, and I always thought, I want to be Julia when I grow up. I didn't want the husband, I just wanted just what she had. She had a kid, and she was a nurse. She was very successful living on her own. But grew out of that phase, I think, pretty quickly.
For a generation devastated by skyrocketing divorce statistics, an estimated 40% of them come from broken homes, it's perhaps not surprising that the most universally beloved TV show among the people we talk to should turn out to be that much syndicated model of domestic contentment, the Brady Bunch.
I think a lot of kids identified with the Brady Bunch because there were all these kids their age, and it was like, you know, it's sort of this glam house, you know, it's like 70s house with a big stairway.
The one thing I love about the Brady Bunch is that the guy had a den.
He did. That's right. He did.
Like a lion.
Go into our house didn't have a den.
And like cute, perky mom.
What did Mrs. Brady do? She didn't have a job. She just went shopping, you know. I mean, that's just weird.
They would recreate little spats that a lot of people had in their own houses.
No real problems that the family could not work out within the space of a 30-minute episode.
I apologize, Captain Bly.
Okay, capital G, goof off.
The Brady Bunch kind of amazed me as how kids never got yelled at and they never did anything wrong. They were just a perfect family. And you kind of wonder, well, I wonder where that family is now.
Today's young adults are entering a world very unlike the one their baby boom predecessors faced, mainly because there's a lot less money floating around. A college education is more important than ever, if only because graduates are likely to earn 4 times more than people without a degree. But college is more expensive than ever, too, and student loans are tight. To make ends meet, more and more young people, many of them working to pay their way through school, are continuing to live at home with their parents. In fact, 75% of young men aged 18 to 24 still live at home, the highest percentage since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And for those not going on to college, these recessionary times may turn out to be even tougher. According to the New York Times, 1.5 million jobs have disappeared in this country in just the past year.
Whenever anyone in the area thought of Kenosha, it was for automobile manufacturing, which started here in 1902. The company that became the Nash Company and then American Motors, so we were known for making the Pacers and the Gremlins and all of those automobiles. And then Chrysler purchased AMC and eventually shut down most of their operations here.
I had a few family members working there, and I mean, when they closed down, they were making good money there, and when they closed down, they don't have nothing else to do because that was a major factory in Kenosha. It was AMC, and when it closed down, everything went, and there was nothing left.
I want to work on a full-time basis in construction. That's what my main goal is right now. But I have nothing long-term, no. Not at the hand. I mean, if I can get a nice hourly wage job, a steady pay, and everything else, I would jump right on it.
My name is Dawn Kamholtz, and I've lived in Kenosha all my life. I like to do stuff, but it's just hard when you got two kids. I mean, one's 2 and one's 1. You can't do very much when you got 2 little ones. When I was younger, I got everything, you know, and now that I'm married and everything, it's like, what happened, you know, and it's just, I don't want Samantha and my kids to grow up thinking they're going to have everything handed to them, because that's not the way it is, and I've realized that.
I realize that it's very easy for me to stand up here and wish you well and tell you to give it all you've got. It's the doing that's tough. But that's the only way any of us will prosper. That's why the theme of this show is Yes, You Can.
There's a lot of young people that come to this convention because of the nature of the industry. It's consumer electronics. It's the hip, the high-tech stuff, the cutting edge. Hello?
When I saw the ad in the newspaper that said, do you want to play games for a living? Of course, I jumped on that. And here I am playing games for a living for Nintendo.
I was really into electronics. I like to take things apart and tinker with them, you know. Mainly the reason I got into it is because of the tinkering.
I'm working for Canon as the gorilla. I'm a working actor in Chicago, and I have to be positive. I know I get what I'm right for. I know I don't get what I'm not right for, and that's the deal. I get upset over it.
Work is very important to me. It really measures your sense of self-esteem and your self-worth. If you do something well, there's something to be proud of.
There are 2 different kinds of people in the world, pimps and whores. And you're either a pimp or a whore. And when you work that day job and you're in someone else's corporation and you're towing the company line, you're basically their whore. But when you're an entrepreneur and you set up your own business and you do your thing, you are your own pimp, and that is the way to go.
Chucklehead is about 8 guys doing what they want to do and how they want to do it. It's about self-control. We were doing it ourselves, and we were going up to Boston to be employed, not by, I don't know, Data General or IBM, but by Chucklehead.
We've made it when this is what we do for a living. If I'm playing a gig every Friday and Saturday night and it's my only job, I've made it. We need money. I do have to have a day job in order to pay the rent, and I work at an insurance agency. This is my abode. It's hard going to work. It's a real drag. I have a nice job. I work with friendly people. But it is really hard to play a gig on a Friday night and then a gig on Saturday night and be a king.
I might sing like Peter Brady, but I like Marsha.
And then go into work on Monday morning and be a pawn.
Do you need 2 copies of that?
That's a hard thing to do. The question we have to keep asking ourselves is, are we having fun? If you're not doing something important and if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?
If life had 3 big challenges, one of them is having a career and also having a relationship with a woman. And both require an emotional commitment and a logistical commitment. And you're always trying to balance them together.
I certainly hope that within a few years I'm married. That's real important to me. I want to have a balance between career and family. I couldn't imagine going through my life without a husband or children.
I got the bills, I got the kids, I got the husband. I mean, not many girls my age have all this responsibility that I have. The friends I know, their parents are divorced. Very rarely they stay together. I've seen the mistakes my parents made, and he's seen the mistakes his parents made. And I don't want my kids to be brought up with some other guy or with someone, I want them to be with their parents together.
My friends, maybe 40% have parents that are not married. That's affected me ever since. I think it would be a long monologue about how that's affected me, but that's a big shakeup.
I think that our generation has seen so much divorce in their childhood and while they were growing up that like myself, I do not want that ever to happen to me, and I would make darn sure that it didn't.
The new generation of young Americans is faced with some hard choices about work and careers and the quality of their lives. In the absence of pat answers, making these choices may require, more than anything else, simple courage.
We live a lot in the past, definitely. I see it all the time, and I wonder what's going to come next, what's going to happen next, because every year it seems like we go back to another decade.
Practically from the time they were born, today's young adults have lived in the giant shadow of the psychedelic 60s. Dig! The 60s are now history, but the baby boom generation continues to celebrate itself and its own long-gone youth through such media as classic rock radio, TV shows such as The Wonder Years, and myth-mongering movies such as The Doors. What do today's young adults make of this oppressive and incessant nostalgia for a past they never lived?
This was 2 years ago, summer of '89. Everybody was getting geared up for the 20th anniversary of Woodstock, and there was articles coming out in, Newsweek and Time and New York Times. And this was coming 1 month after the Tiananmen Square massacre. The whole world was changing. With the Cold War was rapidly coming to an end. Everything was changing around the world. And the only thing America seemed interested in doing was looking back to this overblown, overrated concert in the mud that's 20 years old. And we thought this was almost obscene. There's a lot of exciting changes happening in the world right now. There's a lot of exciting potential and possibilities for young people in this country and around the world. And people should recognize that the answers to society's problems are the answers to your own individual problems. Do not lie in the past. They lie in the present and the future. A lot of people look upon the Live Aid thing as a common experience for this generation. And the baby boom kind of looked down upon it, saying, well, this is no Woodstock. And we kind of said, well, of course it's not. It's something much different. How much money did Woodstock raise for starving people? And that was the beginning of a new period, I think, for this generation. That was something that we all shared in and enjoyed it.
I think the heavy Latin influx had a great effect, and it's given this city a vibrant Latin beat.
You get influenced by Central American, by South American, by the Caribbean. A Cuban influence is beautiful. You don't find this in many places, and it's very pure here.
The ones that are 100% American that were born here are different, totally Americanized. And we are the most conservative ones because we were the ones that came the latest.
For Miami and all the cultures in Miami.
Or the global security idea, or the sort of the theme behind it is that we can't feel secure as a nation if we depend on other people or other nations for our resources. All of a sudden, we were sending our sons overseas because of this oil that we can't live without. Because I need to get in my pickup truck and drive down to 7-Eleven to get a pop. I'm putting my kid in a tank.
During the war, I was supporting the troops in the fact that I thought the best way to support them was to get them out of there.
I wanted to let sanctions work.
I never actually ever thought that, I would actually be deployed to Saudi Arabia or anything like that. That was like one of the biggest shockers about it, when I told my mom that I was going.
I'm not going, yeah, go.
Yes, I do feel like a hero because even though I wasn't actually on the front, I was still part of the team.
I didn't think that the people who fought in the war were as much heroes as more of America's kind of sacrificial lambs.
No, I don't think that's the case. These people were willing to stand behind what the policymakers of this country decided was the best course of action for this country.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of heroes when they came home. I think a lot of them got out of hand when they came home because it was like, well, I was in Saudi Arabia, so kiss my feet. I don't think so.
It really did make us feel good about ourselves that we can go and pretty easily kill over 100,000 people from another country, no problem. I think that makes a lot of us feel really good because we're disempowered in other parts of our life. In one way, man, we're number one. We kick some serious ass.
We perhaps may have gone a bit too far, for instance, with the victory parade we had and the massive display of military hardware. You know, all that wasn't necessary, but it made us feel good.
You gotta fight for your right!
We're not only congratulating our troops for this war, but we're trying to make up for Vietnam.
It's okay to be proud to be an American. It's okay to be patriotic. But I think it's also okay to be proud to be like a citizen of the world.
I think the New World Order is the same old. I don't think anything's going to change.
This is the opportune time to start helping the U.S. itself. We don't have to worry about Russia anymore. I think this is the time to really devote ourselves to our country and to take a look at health care and take a look at welfare and revamp that and drug issues and do something about it.
Generation X, born from 1961 to 81. The generation after the affluent, socially conscious baby boomers. The lost generation, it's called.
They think we're lost, but we're just trying to find something better and new.
Television portrays the generation as this dysfunctional group that lives at Melrose Place. At the movies, Xers find reality bites in a world of too much education and too few jobs.
Mrs. Pierce, do you have any idea what it means to be a cashier at Wiener Schnitzel?
Yeah, it's taking orders and making change.
4 years ago, an author labeled the generation X, and it stuck. Add to that a slew of publications with terms like slacker and 20-nothings, and you get the feeling the nearly 80 million in the generation have no ambition and lots of time to watch MTV.
I don't think we're sitting around bitching and moaning also, which is a big perception that you see on talk shows.
You can't pick up a magazine profiling Kurt Cobain, the leader of a popular band who recently committed suicide, and say this is Generation X. To suggest the generation has one face, one sound, one philosophy is to ignore that it's the most diverse in a century.
We don't have a war. We don't have a depression. We don't have legalized discrimination. We don't have these horrendous and totally visible and identifiable challenges to face.
Eric Liu is a foreign affairs speechwriter for President Clinton, trying to shatter the myth. He started a magazine that gives the generation a chance to define itself.
That's how you get a much more clear, a much more comprehensive sense of who we are as a generation.
I'm not interested in blending in and getting as much money as possible.
Gen X has no choice. Over the past 2 decades, the median income for people under 30 has dropped more than $4,000.
The economy is so much worse for young people today than it was when I was young that we have to give them credit for finding their own way. We had the counterculture. They have the counter-commerce.
Bill Strauss makes his living analyzing generations. As a member of this Washington comedy group, he makes fun of his own. As a lecturer in high schools, he listens to the woes of the next. Pessimism about institutions like Social Security.
It's going to run out by the time it gets to us.
And marriage. Their boomer parents had the highest divorce rate.
A lot of our parents discovered that it wasn't right, so I don't think any of us expect that it'll be right the first time.
With no big revolution to unite them like the boomers had during the 60s, those of Generation X must focus on smaller, important conquests, like repairing the economy and broken families.
They're not out there trying to save the world as a group. They're out there trying to do individual acts of generosity.
If Generation X can accomplish those things, many believe it will be one of the most influential in history.
Generation X, there are lots of them, and they are consumers. They're smart and television savvy. However, as NBC's Keith Morrison reports tonight, they represent quite a challenge for Madison Avenue.
Way up there in the Manhattan Towers, where marketing gurus poke and prod at American attitudes, they've hit a rather nasty bump. Generation X. The problem is that the 20-somethings, boomerangers, baby busters, whatever these 46 million young souls are called, are turning out to be kind of a hard sell.
They don't know how to get in touch with us.
Television. Exactly. Though advertisers have certainly tried, sweet talking like mad to a group that spends $125 billion. What? $125 billion.
This car is like punk rock.
Just on cars, they spend $15 billion. So when Subaru wanted to sell its new Impreza model, it had the actor say,
"Hey, excuse me, but here's what's cool about music, remember?" Now,
this was such a bust that Subaru changed ad agencies. It's already a legend among ad people.
You're making a very grave mistake if you're trying to make broad assumptions about the psyche of an entire generation. And that's exactly what Subaru did in this ad.
Chrysler, on the other hand, hit pay dirt with its neon ad, which stressed simplicity and price. This ad launched orders for almost 200,000 cars.
Say hello to neon. We're being approached as a segment of people to market to advertise to. And what we actually are is a group of people that are immune to advertising.
Immune to advertising? Well, certainly wise to it. By the time he or she has finished high school, an average American kid has watched 350,000 television commercials, 1/3
We speak and understand the language of media as natives rather than as immigrants.
Take this beer ad, for example.
About my Sharon.
This is all image and identity stuff. Rushkoff would say, we know what they're up to, and it won't work.
Stop spending your dollars marketing and just start making good stuff. Just give up.
So why did this Generation X ad for a collect call service work very well? Because it was a simple, funny appeal to save money. Perfect for a TV generation inoculated against hype.
Thanks, phone dude.
All the more reason not to try to lump them into one category and insult them and irritate them by presuming that they think and act a certain way.
But it's really about people who are trying to find their own identity.
All of which might explain why Hollywood's crop of Generation X movies have not been doing as well as was hoped. Barely breaking even, mostly. One studio executive saying Hollywood's in trouble if it can't find a way to reach the 20-somethings.
Stepping out.
America Close Up tonight. Back to Generation X and the problems those in it are having trying to find their way in very uncertain economic times. Tonight, Chief Financial Correspondent Mike Jensen looks at the workplace these millions of young Americans are either in or entering. It is not necessarily an encouraging picture.
Members of Generation X, born after the baby boomers, are entering a workplace that is dramatically different from the one both the boomers and their parents faced.
The reality is they may not do better than their parents, and this could be the first generation that does that.
Their household income is 8% less than their parents' was at the same age in terms of buying power. They think it will be harder for them to achieve financial security, the new generation said in a Fortune survey. Also to own a single-family home and to pay for their children's college education.
They're a group that's headed from two directions, winners and losers. And the losers are going to be hopeless. They're going to have nowhere to go.
William Bloxham is 28, a high school dropout who does maintenance work in a Virginia apartment building.
I would not be in the situation to where I'm just making ends meet if I had gone to college.
He has a girlfriend and a baby, take-home pay of $325 a week, and limited prospects. About 2/3 of the people in his generation make that kind of money or less. In a country that's building an information superhighway, but not many factories. This is the McJobs generation, menial jobs for people without a college degree and low-wage service jobs for a lot of college graduates. For the most highly educated, the outlook is still wonderful. Lori Lesser is 27 and graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard, then Harvard Law. First-year lawyers at big firms like hers make upwards of $80,000 a year. Less than 1% of those in her generation do that well.
I am very fortunate, and I'm very conscious of how fortunate I am for the education that I have.
The good jobs are tough to get, partly because the corporate world has been racked with mergers and takeovers and downsizings. So many of the new generation are working freelance or starting their own businesses. DeRoy Murdoch is a graduate of Georgetown with a master's degree in business from NYU. He worked at a big ad agency before starting his own business after a corporate cutback.
I really enjoy being able to get up every morning, do my own thing, wear shorts around if I want to do that, and really live life the way I want to rather than the way my boss feels I ought to.
For many, that also means getting involved in causes.
People in our generation, the so-called 20-something generation, volunteer at twice the rate that people in the baby boom generation volunteered when they were our age.
They also put very high value on family, not as many workaholics in this group. It's a generation that is profoundly resentful of a government that has saddled it with a $4.5 trillion national debt and spends 10 times as much on retirees as it does on babies. And of a corporate America that has torn up the old social contract that said you do right by me and I'll do right by you.
While we were enjoying amazing movies, music, and television, the best pop culture ever, and as the internet was making its way into everybody's homes, the economy continued to get worse, especially with the dot-com bubble bursting. And then there was 9/11, and that changed everything, especially for Generation X. Even the years of our generation shifted, because by the early 2000s, we were defined as 1965 to 1984.
All day long, we have been asking whether the September 11th attacks and the response to them are defining moments for Generation X. Generational expert and author Neil Howe is with us now from Washington to talk about that. Mr. Howe, thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Stephen.
You have a sense from your research that this is a little bit disorienting for members of Generation X.
Well, very much so. You know, older generations can all recall some time in their lives when America was still a country that people had a sense of where people had a sense of direction. Big institutions were respected and trusted. People felt a sense of cohesion as a nation. Xers, probably many of them cannot recall a time like that in their own lives. A lot of them don't recall anything before Watergate. Some of them don't even recall that.
Well, that's pretty unsettling in itself. Is there a lot of soul searching going on now then?
Well, you know, even boomers can remember growing up as kids during the American High, and so we can kind of come back to that sense. You know, yes, we have to trust big institutions and government to do big things. I think among Xers, there's a sense of, where am I? A little bit of disorientation, a feeling of wondering where history is going, because all of the time that they remember coming of age as adults, this has been a wide open, globalist, market-oriented, free agent society. And the secret to success is to take care of yourself as an individual, put a lot of choices on hold, maybe put off making permanent decisions about getting married or about devoting yourself to a single profession or career. And suddenly they're beginning to see life isn't going to be like that in our future. At least there's a high probability that America won't be that kind of place. So suddenly they have to start reorienting themselves. And I think there's a lot of survey data which suggests that Xers are the most affected. This is the generation most likely to tell surveyors that they are changing their daily habits of living in the wake of 9/11. There's particularly in cities and obviously in New York and Washington, a lot of reporting about how Generation X, a lot of them don't want to live alone anymore. They're moving in with each other. A lot of people reconsidering marriages that they've kept on hold. Maybe they ought to make that final choice and that final commitment, because life is short and history can change and big things can happen. I noticed recently the 101st Airborne, before going to Afghanistan, the two biggest activities before leaving were marriages and writing wills. And this is not the image that we associate with Generation X. It's definitely keeping all those things on hold. The generation that probably has the least connection with mainstream political institutions. This is a generation that doesn't vote, has the lowest voter participation rates of young adults that we've ever measured, doesn't take part in party politics. It doesn't even join mainstream charities. It doesn't give the United Way often in their workplaces. Their attitude toward civic activity was once likened by the president of MIT to that of the Lone Ranger. They just they show up, do a good deed, leave a silver bullet, and then move on. And their attitude towards civic activity is very voluntaristic and personal, face-to-face. And I think now, after 9/11, they're facing a national response which has to be much more mainstream, institutional, cohesive. A lot of the civil liberties they took for granted since the time they were kids may have to be curtailed, and I think that's disorienting to them.
By the time the 2008 financial crisis hit and social media infiltrated our lives, Generation X had been pushed aside in the social conversation, and the millennials had taken center stage. We've been living through the great boomer-millennial war for more than a decade now, while Gen X remains stuck in the middle and doing their own thing. And that's how we like it. But as we've laid low and technology has completely changed our world, there have been some interesting developments in the world of generational definitions and theory. Once again, the definition of Generation X has changed. Now it's 1965 to 1980 officially. That's the range the Pew Research Center uses for all of their work, as well as many other organizations and researchers. This means the current definitions of the generations are that boomers are 46 to 64, Gen X 65 to 80, millennials 1981 to 1995, Gen Z to 1996 to 2010, and Gen Alpha 2011 to whenever. And I have to say, I don't like this at all. I think it's wrong. I think it's completely, it makes no sense. I believe Douglas Copeland was onto something with his first definition of Gen X being 1961 to 1971. Once everyone had a TV in their home, that was the start of a new generation. So it makes sense to me that boomers end at 1960. Gen X should start at 1961, and then it should stop at about 1975. After that, I think there's a micro-generation called the Xennials, from 1976 to 1984. These are my people. We are the last group of Americans to have extensive memories of life before the internet, cell phones, and social media. Millennials, I think, should be 1985 to 1999, the last generation to remember the world before 9/11. The new millennium brought us Gen Z, and then Gen Alpha arrived in the early 2010s. That's my theory anyway. Of course, there are some blurred lines here, but I think the rapid pace of technology has shortened generations because of fewer common experiences. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a middle-aged woman on YouTube. Hey, did you know that the AARP has completely redesigned their website to cater to Gen X? Okay, bye.
Top that.